Okay, hi guys. My name is Sanjay Gupta. I'm a cardiologist in New York, and last week I did a video on how to diagnose your palpitations, and in that I spoke about the atrial rhythms and how to diagnose those. So I promised that I was going to do another video. I'm sorry, it's early morning. I've just gotten out of bed, so I look pretty awful. But I thought I'd do this because I'm away now for a little while, so I might not be able to do a video next week. But I'm going to try and do a couple of videos before I go. So this is how to diagnose your palpitations part 2. Okay. Now, as I was saying, your palpitations are very much defined by where the abnormal impulse starts from, or where the impulse starts from. It doesn't have to be abnormal. It can be normal. And the normal sort of pathway where things can happen is that it can happen in the pacemaker, it can happen around the pacemaker in the atrium, and then it can go down to a part called the AV node, which is the connection, the electrical connection between the top part of the heart and the bottom part of the heart. That's called the AV node, okay? Now, you can get something called an SVT or an AVNRT or an AVRT, so AV node reentrant tachycardia. And this is how this feels, all right? Let me tap it out. Sudden onset, very fast, very regular, not irregular, regular. And then sudden offset. Okay, so it's just like a light switch, but it's very fast. So if you count the heart rate, it's usually around about 160 to 180 beats per minute, something like that. It can be as high as 200, beats per minute. The interesting thing is that a lot of people who have SVTs or AVNRTs will have had palpitations for a long time. And when I see them in clinic, they often come back and say, well, I've always had palpitations. And when I've had them, I've just laid down or I've pressed on my neck and they've gone away. So they're usually sudden onset, sudden offset, unpredictable, can come on at any time. But for the majority of people who have them, they've had them a while and they know how to deal with them. The reason they come and see me is because they've started getting more frequent, okay? Again, these are not dangerous. They are inconvenient. The good news about AVNRTs and AVRTs is that they are now curable through an ablation. And those are exactly the kind of people I say to myself, well, why don't you just go and get it cured? Why don't you have an ablation and get it cured? And then it won't bother you ever again. And the reason it happens is that what ends up happening is that some people have an accessory area. So normally what happens is that the impulse goes from the pacemaker, crosses the atria, goes to the AV node. Now, if some people have an accessory pathway, what can happen is that the impulse goes down into the AV node, goes down the right pathway, and then goes back up through the abnormal pathway. So you get a cyclical route around that AV node, and that triggers off a very, very fast heart rate. So if you burn the accessory pathway, if you burn this abnormal route, then you've cured the SVT. And that's what an ablation does. So it's well worth thinking about that. But again, as I say, not dangerous, inconvenient, but not dangerous. All right. Next, so now we've crossed the AV node. Now the next step is to try and work out what kind of heart rhythms can occur in the ventricles. Okay. And generally, the problem with heart rhythms that occur in the ventricle is this, that when the rhythm is being activated in the ventricle, then it leads to a less effective ventricular contraction, okay? The very fact is that the heart is like a bag of rubber bands. It needs an activation, it needs to stretch, and then as it stretches, it comes back and pushes blood out. Now, if you have an impulse that is coming from the ventricle, then that's happening before the heart gets enough time to stretch, and therefore it doesn't fill with as much blood and therefore pumps less blood out. And that is why ventricular rhythms are associated with a significantly less cardiac output. And that can be dangerous sometimes, but I'll talk you through them one at a time, okay? Now, here is what a PVC feels like, a premature ventricular complex. All right. Missed beat, thud, thud. No. Again, normal, normal, normal. Pause, thud, thud, and then it goes away. Okay. And sometimes what people can get is they can get runs of these. Okay, so they can get and when you get 2 or 3, so when you get 1, it's called a PVC. When you get 2, it's called a PVC couplet. When you get 3, you get a triplet. And anything above 3 usually is classified as non-sustained VT. Okay, but that doesn't, anything above 3 beats and less than 30 seconds of continuous beats can be classified as non-sustained VT. Now, the important thing about this is that PVCs by themselves are not dangerous. They happen all the time anyway. If you get a long sustained run, then of course, for that period of time when you're getting all these PVCs, there's going to be less blood coming out of the heart continuously. And that is why it's very important to have a strong heart to start off with, because if you have a strong heart, then whatever comes out of the heart is adequate to get the blood around the rest of the body. If you have a weak heart and then you have a run of PVCs, let's say 30 seconds of PVCs, then that would seriously compromise amount of blood coming out of the heart, and that can cause people to collapse, and also can cause people to develop funny heart, can cause people to develop things like ventricular tachycardia, ventricular fibrillation, because the heart is then not getting the blood that it needs, because it's not pumping any blood out, because it's not getting, because the heart has a blood supply as well. So the heart needs blood to keep doing its job. Now, yes, I know it's a pump and it's pushing the blood out, but if it's not pushing enough blood out, then it will not get its own blood supply, and therefore the muscle cells will start suffocating, and the muscle starts, when they start suffocating, that's when you develop ventricular fibrillation and cardiac arrest. So PVCs by themselves are not dangerous. In fact, they're quite normal. If you have more than 3, that can be called non-sustained VT, but doesn't really mean very much. If you get up to 30 seconds, then if you're getting more than 30 seconds worth, then that's what's called ventricular tachycardia, but less than 30 seconds worth is called non-sustained ventricular tachycardia. If you have a structurally normal heart, if you have a nice, strong heart, then your heart will cope, all right? If you have a weak heart, then it becomes a little bit more serious, all right? And now the only other thing to be aware of is there's a lot of anxiety about how many I'm getting, etc. Truthfully, you have to get more than 20,000 PVCs over a 24-hour period on a consistent basis. And if that happens, then the heart can weaken with time. But the good news is, if you take them away, then the heart can strengthen back up, okay? So if you're getting PVCs, don't worry too much. It's worth knowing whether your heart is structurally normal. It's also worth knowing perhaps how many you're getting. And actually, if they're not causing you symptoms, don't even bother, all right? If they're not causing you symptoms, don't worry about them. Then you have a condition called ventricular tachycardia. Now, what is ventricular tachycardia? This is a dangerous rhythm. Okay, now this is the rhythm that people get worried about. Ventricular tachycardia is a bunch of ventricular ectopics, one after the other, for a prolonged run, 10 minutes, etc. So in that, as I say, what happens is, how do you feel it? You feel a very fast heart rate. It is generally regular. It is generally of sudden onset, sudden offset, and it generally makes you feel unwell. It'll generally make you feel yucky, because the ventricles are going that fast. The cardiac output is going to be compromised. A lot of people have this feeling of impending doom when that happens. Okay, and if it's ventricular tachycardia, your heart rate's going to be 180 to 250, 260 beats per minute, and you will feel uncomfortable. When you feel when you feel like that, then it's obviously a very important thing to seek help. Usually, ventricular tachycardia tends to occur in people who have structurally abnormal hearts or who have damage to their heart from previous heart attacks, etc. It can sometimes occur in younger people, particularly things like channelopathy, so electrical disturbances within the heart. Inherited conditions can cause this. That is perhaps the only thing that is really serious and potentially life-threatening. Having said that, a lot of people who have structurally normal hearts can cope with ventricular tachycardia. But if someone diagnoses ventricular tachycardia in you, then it is absolutely, absolutely essential that you get tested out properly by a cardiologist. You have an echocardiogram. You probably need electrophysiological studies. You probably need a cardiac MRI scan to give you an even better idea of the structure of the heart and to make sure that there is no evidence of infiltration within the heart. Remember, on an echocardiogram, you're just looking at the visually at how the heart is contracting. It doesn't give you as much information about what the heart muscle is composed of, whereas an MRI can do that. So I hope this was useful. Those are mainly the heart rhythms you need to know about. I hope this was useful. And if you need to get in touch with me now, the problem is I did have a Facebook page, but Facebook's now have this real name policy, so I can't use my Facebook page for the time being. I'm trying to negotiate. You can find me on Your Cardiology 1, Your Cardiology 1, okay? And that's a Facebook page I've linked to my own personal Facebook, so you can log me, or you can look me up there. I'm on Twitter, but the best way to get in touch with me, should you need me, is to use my website, www.yourcardiology.co.uk. And my secretary's number is on 01904725811. Now, I'd really be grateful if you could share this video. I think there's a lot of people out there who have found these to be helpful, and in whom palpitations generate an unnecessarily large amount of anxiety. It's just worth bearing in mind, most palpitations are not dangerous. And if you in yourself are a healthy person, then they're even less likely to be dangerous. So great. Thank you so much for listening. Take care. Bye.